Okay, as we spoke about last week, we are going to we're going to change directions somewhat and delve into an extremely important topic. And the general topic label, I guess, would be equitable wealth distribution. Now, everybody could argue with that. What I mean by wealth, what I mean by distribution, what do I mean by equitable? And I'm going to defer on all of that right now, okay? Because we are going to jump in, and as we get into it, we are going to start seeing what we mean by equitable and wealth and distribution, and we're going to start seeing some of the issues that would have to be addressed, okay? We're also going to have to look at the large issues in our society that we're dealing with as they relate to Christians, and it is important. Now, the first thing, without getting technical, I don't want to get technical at this point, like we're a bunch of economists. I want to talk about this. When we talk about wealth distribution, what are we really talking about? And I mean, in very practical terms, what does wealth mean, whether you have it or whether you don't? What does wealth practically translate to? Well, money, yeah, but I mean, nobody wants money for its own sake, do they? Unless they're going to wallpaper their house with it. What is it that wealth gives you, or the lack of wealth? Okay, security, okay? Security from all kinds of things. What else can wealth get you? Or power, the ability to influence, greater or lesser extent, right? What else?
Material pleasures.
Pleasure, happiness. What else?
Sadness.
Well, not having it and not being able to get things, or let's face it, you might be able to handle it well enough, but watching your kids or your grandkids not have it can, okay? What else? What else does wealth give you, or the lack of wealth deprive you? Well, we talked about power and influence.
Basic needs.
Reputation.
Okay, that kind of gets to security, but yeah, the ability to eat, reputation is kind of along with alliance. How about this? How about freedom? Does it give you freedom?
Yeah.
It certainly does. If I have money, I can go places and do things that I can't do if I don't. What about opportunity? Well, absolutely. Absolutely, it buys opportunity. Okay? Opportunity for what? For jobs, for more wealth, for experience, to know people, to go places, to be things, to live in places. Does it buy health?
To some degree.
Well, listen, a lot of poor people know exactly how difficult it is to stay healthy if you have no money. And the fact of the matter is, health and longevity correlate to wealth. Okay? So when I say longevity, what am I really talking about?
9 years.
What I'm talking about is, if you're poor, you don't live as long. Is that true?
Yeah.
You say 9 years. I don't know if that's true or not. It sounds like
I read
it.
that stat yesterday.
I mean, I wouldn't dispute it, but I don't care if it's 1 year. We are talking about people who have more money live longer, or people who have less money don't live as long. Okay? What about justice? Does money buy justice?
It's not justice, but it buys.
It buys something. Okay? And it can protect you in ways that, and I'm not necessarily saying this is the way it should be. In many ways, I am saying this is the way it is. And in many ways, this is the way it should be. All right, so we're talking about not just for you, but for your family too. Yes? Mm-hmm. Yes. We're talking about wealth distribution. We are talking about, well, let me put it this way, okay? We talk a lot in the United States and in America about liberty and freedom, small government, and having the government out of your life and all of this kind of stuff. That's child's play, and that's nothing compared to what wealth distribution in your particular wealth situation matters. You can say to me, I can have all the money I want, but the government can come and take it. It's not secure, and I'll agree with you. However, if you have no money, there's nothing for the government to take. All right? So the thing is, I'm not saying that the one is not important. I'm saying the other is every day, all the time, and it is the stuff of life in terms of life in this world. What we eat, the cars we drive, the things we do, the things we dream about, the houses we live in, and how comfortable our children are, and whether we can take care of them or not, take care of our spouses or not, go to the doctor or not. This matters a lot. So when we talk about wealth distribution, we are talking about something of intense moral importance. Do we agree with this? It is intensely morally important to the extent that anything in this world matters. How wealth is distributed or divided, how you get it, how you keep it, how you lose it, is incredibly important. Frankly, far more important than most of the other things that we've been talking about in terms of being moral imperatives. Just in terms of what you can do to somebody if you deprive them of wealth and what you can offer them if they have it. Okay? And it makes whether the person wants to be transgender or not seem as nothing. So let's consider how important this is. Now, until relatively recently, the fundamental issues relating to equitable wealth distribution in our society were not debated at a sort of root level. They were debated in terms of tweaking it here and tweaking it there. But for the most part, most Americans more or less believed in the same general principles about how we do wealth distribution. And as I said, the arguments were mostly on the edges. That is changing. There are a lot of people who are raising brand new objections to how we do this and how we ought to do this that is behind a lot of the political mischief, but also requires Christians to take a good, careful look at how in our society do we do this, and ought we to do it this way, and what are the pluses and what are the minuses. So this is enormously important, and we cannot just ignore it. And we mustn't, as Christians, think that when we're talking about the morality of how we deal with our neighbor, we're primarily talking about sexual ethics and things like that. It is much deeper than that, particularly now, when questions are being raised about how we do what we do. So we are essentially going to compare and discuss two primary ways of distributing wealth. And I'm going to go to two extremes, okay? But they represent basically the two different poles that are under discussion and have been for some time. And the one is what we're going to call the command economy. That's a fancy way of saying top down, that governments and committees determine how the economy will run, who will get paid what will be produced, and so forth like that. This is the socialist communist model. The other alternative is the free market model. We're going to look at both of those. We're not going to get to all of this today, but we're going to lay some important foundations. We're going to compare and contrast the moral foundations of each of these because Christians need to know what the arguments are, pro and con. And it's not as simple as many people think. Now, I think that there are answers that we Christians can and should come to, but I think that we should only come to those after we've carefully considered how we arrived at those conclusions, rather than just assuming that God inspired Adam Smith and that's why we're here, okay? All right. So the long run on this is I want to conduct a little bit of an experiment and sort of a thought experiment. And what we're going to do is we're going to pretend that we're a committee of people. We're a committee of intelligent people. We're a committee of good people. We're a committee of people who truly want to do God's will. We're a committee of people who truly want to love our neighbor as ourselves and do what's just. We are a committee of people who have at our disposal all the resources that a government can provide us, okay? And we are going to try to, pardon me?
The government provides?
Provide. And we are going to do the very best we can to make the very best choices, and we are going to wrestle with the questions, okay? And we are going to begin, because we are a committee of people, we're going to operate a command economy. And the reason why I want to do this is because I want all of us to understand more profoundly yet than already we've talked about the moral foundation of the command economy. Let me tell you that if there is one thing that a communist or a socialist has up on a free market person, is that it is this moral argument. It sounds very good, and in many ways it is very good. So we need to know what those arguments are, and if they are persuasive at all, why they don't necessarily carry the day, and if they don't, why not, okay? But shall we put it this way? I'm a free market guy, so you know that, all right? But you got to give the devil their due, and the fact of the matter is, not everything is good about the free market. Not everything is good at all, and so we need to know what it is, the trade-offs that we're making, because we Christians make a trade-off whichever way we go. And they are moral trade-offs as well as economic trade-offs. And we need to understand these sorts of trade-offs because we are citizens and are making these decisions, okay? So we begin with, the reason why we begin with the command economy is because by nature of the command economy there are choices to be made. So we're going to make choices. We're going to think about things. We're going to think about how wealth should be distributed and why.
And you will make choices for everyone else.
And we will be making choices for everyone else, which is good and which is not good, okay? So these are all things that we'll just kind of tuck back in our minds. I don't want to be too quick to jump, because you're going to see a lot of this and you're going to know where this is going to go, but don't go there yet. Let's pretend that God himself has come here and said, I want you to do this, okay? So we can't do it another way, and we might say, Lord, are you sure? And he's going to say, I'm sure. So we're going to try to make this work. We are not going to try to undermine it, in other words. We may be wrong, okay, but we're going to try, all right? Now, before we do any discussion about equitable wealth distribution, in other words, managing the economy, because that's what economies do, okay? They distribute wealth. They either do it well or don't, but nevertheless, that's what they do. We are going to reflect on, well, I don't know why it's doing that, some important theological realities about the world, okay? Number one, if you've ever been in any economics class, you know this, but you don't have to go to economics class to recognize. They use the word scarcity there. What they mean is there's just not enough of everything, and there never is going to be enough of everything, okay? So, in other words, part of the job of distributing wealth, if there was plenty for everybody to have everything they wanted, then there would be no issues here, okay? Everybody goes and gets whatever they want, and the more you want, the more you get. It's that simple. But in reality, nobody can get everything they want, or at least we should put it this way. Well, that's true, but certainly it is true here. Everybody can't have everything everybody wants. That can't be. So we're going to have to ration things. There's just not enough for everybody to have everything. And we're not just talking about health care. We're talking about everything. Paper clips have to be rationed. You understand that? Fortunately, most people don't need very many paper clips, and they're easy to manufacture, so, you know, that's fine. But nevertheless, there is a point where somebody can't afford a paper clip, okay? It's the way it is. Okay, so scarcity is never enough. Here's another important thing that we've got to bear in mind, and that is the ability of human beings to understand the present situation, fully to understand what all is going on, to control it, or to see the future is limited. Sometimes it is limited profoundly. Sometimes it is limited somewhat, but it is limited. One thing that so you laugh because I say whatever the government can. Well, okay, that's the problem is we're stuck with what we've got, and what we've got is not God. We don't have God telling us this is how you do it. Okay, if God were to come down here and run our economy, then I say command economy all the way. God's got it, we're fine, okay? But he's not, which means that we're going to have to do the best we can based upon the best information that we have and the best ability to control. And we're going to see an awful lot of the problems that are going to develop as we try to wrestle with these things, whichever market system you use, okay, are going to involve, we don't understand fully what's going on, we cannot control events as much as we need to in order to make it work, and we can't see very well the future. There are a lot of unintended consequences, in other words. Things that happen because we didn't understand what was going on, couldn't control things that were going on, and the future has all kinds of mysteries for us. So while we're trying to decide who gets the security, who gets to live in a nice house, who gets to send their kids to college, by the way, fresh on my mind as yours too, not super fresh, but do you remember that scandal that occurred not very long ago when we had parents buying their kids into college?
I never still don't see where the crime.
I was surprised. I was really surprised. I was surprised that that was going on. I was. But the nature of my surprise was that it was illegal. I just thought that's the way it went. I thought that you made donations and your kids got in. Now, another way to get in is they can be just really, really smart. I assumed, now I'm being a little bit cynical here. I do understand that there's such a thing as bribery, but look, how many kids at an Ivy League school where smart kids, really smart kids can't get in, how many of those kids just happen to have famous names?
Mm-hmm.
How does that happen?
Well, part of the issue with that was there was also some cheating and falsification on.
Oh, I understand.
GPTs and things
I understand. I'm not saying it. I'm being cynical here. What I'm saying is the idea that the rich can get their kids in schools that the poor can't is really my point. That is so obvious and has been so obvious for, well, not just for so long, forever. Okay? That it surprised me that this is going to be a controversy. Now, I understand where you're coming from, and that's fine, and I'm not saying that this should be okay. I'm just trying to say the world in which we live is so clearly and obviously this way that we just don't worry about it too much, okay? And yet, from a moral point of view, is that really what we think ought to be? Okay, and there's a little aside, no extra charge for that. Okay, so there are a couple of theological realities about the world. There's not enough. Another way to put it, I guess, is the poor you will always have with you. Okay, there's not enough for everybody. And there never has been, and there never will be. It is the nature of this fallen world. In the world to come, things will be different, but not here. Okay? And the second thing is we simply have a limited ability to understand and control things. So we are not God, and we have to take that into consideration as we're making these decisions. Now, some additional theological realities about human beings. We are all of equal dignity and worth in God's eyes. Okay? Now that is a theological truth. Some of us are not by nature worthy of having more than others. Okay? That's why in the kingdom of God, God does not care what you have, and that's the end of it. However, in this world, there are certain truths that we have to recognize about human beings. And that is, as to our innate abilities, we are unequal. That is, the genes you are born with, the intelligence, the physical skills that you have, we are not equal. Okay? That's just the reality. As to character, we are not equal. Some people are more able just by the way they were born. Some people are more deserving because of the way they are. And that's true. And then finally, I'm talking about innately, but now innate abilities, but also there's the abilities that you have now based upon not only your innate abilities, but what you've done with your past, okay? You may have wrecked all your innate abilities. You were born smart and physically talented, and you've addled your brain on drugs and wasted your life, and now you're not worth a darn. All right, so we have not only to consider what you were born with, but what you've got right now, and the fact is there's a tremendous amount of inequality. Do you remember how a few weeks ago we were talking about God's commands relating to sexual morality cut very unevenly, hit some people much harder than others? Okay, well, again, that's child's play compared to this. When you look at the inequalities that are in the world just by nature of the differences among human beings, we have our work cut out for us if we're going to try to figure out how to distribute wealth in this scenario. It would be easy, relatively, if we were all the same. Then it would just be a logistical matter of trying to get the same amount to everybody, okay? That would be tough enough, by the way. However, we don't necessarily think that everybody should have the same amount. Of course, maybe we do, but let's say we don't, okay? So the fact that people are so profoundly different and that some have to begin life with. There was a joke many years ago, long before Donald Trump was running for president, but he had said something or another. And anyway, it was a joke, a little cartoon, and it was a new Monopoly game. And the first space was start life with $100 million. Well, okay, it was something like the Donald Trump life game or something like that. Start life with 100. Well, okay, well, some of us don't necessarily start life with $100 million, but we start with minds and bodies that can do, and personalities that will work. And some of us start life without any of that. Some of us are doomed to be poor. And it doesn't matter how hard you work. And some of us get rich almost by accident. Okay. So that's life. Now, so these are some inequalities that we have to deal with in the world. Here are some more inequalities. Human beings are unequally corrupt and unequally corruptible. Everybody's corruptible, right? Everybody has a price, but some of us are cheaper than others, and some of us are already corrupt, and some of us are ready to take the deal. We have to take that into account too, because economies and wealth distributions and governments are run by people, and so you've got to figure that out. You at least take into account human beings are unequally capable of rational decision making, and all of us behave irrationally from time to time. So I get very suspicious whenever it is just assumed that we will all make rational decisions, and so we're going to count on everybody making rational decisions. Not everybody can do that very well, and none of us do it all the time, and you don't always know when you're not doing it. So this is
objectivist.
So this is part, right? So this is part of the challenge, that we're dealing with human beings, not machines. If we were dealing with machines, then perhaps we could make some rules that, you know, people will figure it out in the end. But we're dealing with people, and people do strange things, and some people can't do what other people can do, and so we have to take that into account. These are factors that we can't jettison as we're planning our economy. We can't just forget some of these and decide that everybody's good. Everybody's good and everybody's rational, okay? You can do that if you are going to have another thought experiment, what would the world be like, but it's not this world. This world isn't that way. So if we're actually going to try to love our neighbor, we got to consider who our neighbor is and who we are. All right. Human beings are unequally motivated to do what is right. We don't always do what is right. Some of us are more inclined to do what is right because it is right. Some of us are less inclined. Now, by the way, what I'm talking about here is not really about the sort of the theological question of our total depravity. When we talk about total depravity, we're talking about a human being in the eyes of God as he views us in the light of perfection. We are totally depraved. We cannot climb up to God or become what God wants. What we're talking about here is human beings compared to other human beings, okay? And so human beings compared to human beings, some of us, okay, are more motivated to do the right and decent thing, and some of us are less motivated to do the right and decent thing. We have to take that into account. Human beings are unequally motivated to act in the common good. Some of us will throw the rest of society under the bus if I can have a little bit more. Others of us will act much more altruistically for the benefit of all. Some of the things that, for example, our founding fathers really wanted and felt was needed in our culture was what they called civic virtue. In other words, politicians and statesmen, but also individual citizens, had this idea of civic responsibility. We don't make decisions just for our own selfish ends. We may act in our self-interest, but that's different than acting selfishly, okay? Self-interest means that I'm going to take care of my own house and my own family and keep everything in my lane in order. And that's my self-interest. It's in my best interest to do that. But if you were to ask the question, well, what if everybody did that? Then I'm happy. If everybody does that. If everybody asks in their proper self-interest. But selfishness means I'm going to grab what I want because I can get it. And that's well, what if everybody did that? Well, then we have chaos and we're eating one another, okay? So self-interest is not necessarily bad. It just means that I'm going to take care of what God has given me charge of. Selfishness means I'm going to take care of myself at the expense of anything else. All right? Human beings are unequally motivated by selfish desires. I just talked about that. Some of us are deeply devoted to getting what we want, and we will inflict pain and trouble and loss on others in order to get it. Others are horrified at that thought and generally will not act that way. But these are all, and the key thing here is not that these things exist, it's the inequalities that I'm talking about. We can't count on, if I could count on you to be this much selfish, every single person would be this much selfish, and that's it, then we could adjust for that. But some of us are this selfish, and some of us are this selfish. Some of us are this talented, and some of us are this talented. Some of us are this good, and some of us are that good. And that means, and you don't wear it as a placard around your neck so we can all see. So these are all things that have to be taken into consideration if we're going to fashion an economy that determines how wealth is distributed to every single person. We've got to take these into account. And we can't just pretend that any of these don't exist. There are other things that we would have to take into account, but we have to stop somewhere. And it seems to me that this is a formidable enough list of the inequalities and challenges. Now, just as a little aside, those who tout too much the idea of fairness in society do need to take a little stock of themselves. What is it that you're saying? Because we start life grotesquely unfairly. What are we trying to do? It's a nice motivation and a nice thought. What are we trying to do? Make everybody in the same spot? If we do, well, that's going to involve a lot of injustices. Are we just going to let everything play out the way it would? If you start life with next to nothing, you'll end life with next to nothing. Too bad for you. Is that what we think? Some hybrid? So just spouting out that we want to be fair and equitable, those are just words. They don't mean anything. I want to hear what you mean, what you're talking about. And most people don't know what they mean and don't know what they're talking about. Because a casual glance at this stuff will tell you this is a very complicated question. Yes, Ann?
I think most people today, when you hear them talking about being fair and equitable and distributing well, they're talking about taking from people who have more and giving to themselves. That's what they're talking about. They're coming from very selfish viewpoint.
Yeah, let's pretend we're not. Let's pretend that...
They're not really interested in equality.
I
They just want to make sure they've got as much as somebody else.
I agree that
Right.
Yeah, I agree that is often the case. In our case, it is not the case because I've already stipulated that we are good people who want to love our neighbor, and we are not in this for ourselves. And even if that were the case, this is difficult. Okay? Even if that were the case. And I will concede that it is not the case, which is one of the factors we're going to have to take into account later on when we decide whether this command economy is workable.
I don't see how we can, I just don't see how we can do this. We're completely getting away from reality.
It has been done. It will continue to be done. It has been done better. It has been done worse. The free market system, number one, is not totally free, so we do this even today to some extent. And the free market system is a relatively recent innovation, and before that, everything was done maybe not well this way, but more or less this way. The thing is, I want you to be thinking morally, because we can't, if the alternative, just consider this. When we talk about what wealth distribution means, we're talking about people's ability to live. If we say we're just going to leave that up to the market, we better know what we're doing and why we just did that. Because I don't leave anything up to the market with my own family. I just don't leave it up to chance or however it comes out. When there are things that I really care about, I am going to try to have my hands on it. Now, So that's what I'm saying is let's give this view a decent hearing so that we understand why. If there are people who are saying we need, and again, I'm not saying it would ever be okay for people to say I'm going to take money from you and give it to myself, but there are well-meaning people who do want to take money from this group and give it to that group, and they want to do it for the right reason, or at least for a good reason.
But they're not taking it from themselves.
But even if they did,
That's it.
even if they did, if they took it from themselves and others, okay? And the reason why, you can't just take it from yourself because they'll say, what good is that going to do? I'm just one person. Now, I'm willing to chip in along with everybody else. I'll listen to somebody like that. At least I won't call them a hypocrite. If you're going to take other people's money and not contribute yourself, well, then that's just ridiculous. You don't have any skin in the game. And if you're going to take other people's money and give it to yourself, well, you're a thief. That's all that is. There are well-meaning people who think that we should take from the rich and give to the poor. They have an argument. We should not just say that's stealing. It may be at a level stealing, but it's not the same as the normal stealing, and there is an argument to be made about this. All right? Now, just because I'm saying there's an argument to be made about that, I'm not going to start handing out Communist Party cards to all of you. But it is important that we Christians understand what is right and wrong with this reasoning. The command economy arguments are compelling. Okay? They should not be laughed at. There is a reason why they have resonance. Now, I'm going to tell you that the market economy has a lot of power to it also, moral coherence as well, and we need to understand that. Here's what I'm also going to tell you. Unlike with, let's say, transgender issues, there's no thus says the Lord here. There are some important principles about loving our neighbor, but exactly which system loves our neighbor the best and best incorporates God's plan for how we take care of one another, there's not a thus says the Lord, you'll have this or that kind of economy, or that's not, but what we have here is we have things that work and things that don't, and what that means is this is a fact-intensive discussion. We have to look at the particular facts. Okay? This may seem good, but if it doesn't work, who cares? This may not seem good, but it produces terrific results, so let's consider it. Yeah.
I would argue that there are commandments such as don't covet X, Y, and Z.
Oh, sure.
And that coveting is actually at the root of many of these distribution arguments.
It doesn't have to be, though. And that's the thing, is that we can be here. We are a committee devoted to doing what's right. So we are not coveting anybody's stuff. I refuse to admit that I am not entitled to believe that the rich should give to the poor without my being covetous. I may not have anything out of this. I may really think that the world would be a better place. So what I want to do is I want to examine this from the point of view of its best view. Okay? It's a straw man argument to set up nothing but thieves and cowards and covetous people and greedy people who just want to take and steal for themselves and say, see, that's why we don't want to do that. That is a straw man. It's easy to knock down. Who wants that? But the argument where, well, what if selfless people are really trying to do what's right? What about that argument? Okay? Now, there may be arguments against that, but let's bring those arguments that make sense. Okay, where are we here? Some general considerations. All right, we're going to fly through some of this because we could spend a lot of time on any one of these points, but I want to get the larger picture here. Here's just a simple one. I don't want to spend a lot of time with it, but should wealth be distributed to individuals or families? We've already talked about the centrality of families. Should a family of 5 have 5 times as much, and should each individual get their own cut? Or do we say, no, there's something about a family unit that we really would prefer to take care of families, and if a family is one person, okay, but the fact of the matter is there's something about a family unit where we might want to take care of families.
How do you define family?
Well, again, we can't go into all of that, but the thing is there are such things as families, and an awful lot of what we're trying to do, for example, is helping kids. In order to help kids, we have to go through the parents. Or do we want to take the parents out of the equation and help the kids directly? Again, huge important thing here. So without getting into all the details, which by itself is, several PhD courses here, just recognize that that's one little thing. We're not going to return to it a lot, okay? But it's just like not a small thing that we might want to think about, because some mischief has happened in our society as the efforts to bypass families and help people individually have had a tendency to degrade family cohesion. Okay? Now, here's a question I know that all of you are very excited about. How much should a person make?
As much as they can ethically.
Well, that begs the question, okay? Now, so we are going to ask two questions here. We're not going to answer the questions. We are instead going to recognize the issue involved here. When we talk about how much a person should make, because we are at the helms of a command economy, and we are going to decide what each person should make, okay? Notice I'm using should. That's an interesting word that I've talked about before, about what should be, right? Okay, first off, another similar question is how much should a person have? That's different than make, okay? And what about windfalls? Some people get stuff for nothing. In other words, they inherited it all, or they won the lottery, or something like that. Does that make any difference? Do we care how a person came into what they have? And we might not. Okay. Now, first off, a minimum guarantee. Should there be a minimum guaranteed salary for everybody? And if we have one, should it be a minimum livable salary? Now, that sounds good. We want everybody to have enough. So, but if we bite on that and say, yeah, there should be a minimum, okay? Well, then that invites additional questions, and I've got them up there. Well, should there be a connection to work? What if a person doesn't work?
Can't work.
What if a person doesn't do anything very valuable? They can't work, or they can, but just nobody wants them because they're not very good. So if we connect it to work and we have a minimum amount, that's going to be a problem, because minimum amount means a minimum amount. That means even if you don't work. So if you connect it to work, presumably it's not really, minimum might be zero, right? Should we adjust for age and dependence or obligations, or again, work, or other kinds of service that you might do? Again, we're talking about a minimum salary. So, but a minimum salary for a person with 5 kids, should it be the same as a minimum salary for a person on their own? Or are we going to give a minimum salary to all 5 kids as well, in which case this family is living large compared to the single person who only gets 1, okay? So if we're going to make the decision that we should have a minimum guaranteed salary, exactly how are we going to do that? Do we pay money? I'm going to give you a minimum amount of money and let you spend that money however you want, or are we going to say, all right, everybody needs to have certain minimum things? So we're going to make sure that everybody has a house, and we're going to have make sure everybody has enough food to eat, and we're going to have make sure everybody has enough health care if they get sick, and they got transportation so that they can get around, or whatever it is that we feel that every person ought to have. In other words, we're not going to give you money, enough money that you could have a house and you can have a car and you can have health care if you want it, but you could decide to better house and not such good health care, or no health care and you're going to have a nice car, and we're going to let you make those decisions. Are we going to give money, or are we going to provide the things that we think everybody ought to have? And what you're really talking about there, whoops, oh, did I leave that out?
Maximum cap on income.
Oh, yeah. Well, what I'm talking about here is, I'm talking about also the freedom, security trade-off, okay? So if you've got somebody who we're talking about a minimum amount, we are not talking about a wealthy person, okay? So if we give them money, what we are doing is giving them maximum freedom to divide out that money however they want. But if we're afraid that they're not going to divide that money very well, then we might decide for them how they're going to divide that money, taking away their freedom in order to make sure that they have what we think that they should have, okay? there are people that I think all of us would agree we should not give them money. Give them a house, give them health care, but don't give them money and ask them to divide it up. It isn't going to happen.
Go to heroin.
Or they won't get insurance, and then they'll get sick, and now we're left with the bill anyway, and we didn't give them the money for that. Okay? Then there are other people we would say, yeah, you know what, you've got your head screwed on straight, we'll just give you the money and you figure it out, however you want. Just understand these are the rules. Okay, so you can't necessarily say one or the other, but if you're going to get into a minimum amount, you know, then you're going to have to take these things into consideration. And then the other end of this is the maximum. Should there be a cap on income? Is there any moral issue with somebody making gobs and gobs and gobs of money, more than they could possibly ever spend, hundreds of times more than what the ordinary American makes? Is there any issue in that?
If they are delivering value to society.
Okay, you are trying to answer the question. I'm saying, is there any moral issue in that? The fact that you tried to answer the question says yes. Okay, he's trying to justify why some people should be paid hundreds of times more than others. And he's offering a justification, and we might decide that's a good justification, or we might decide it's not. Or it could be, but we just don't know. The thing is, this is an issue, okay, because if this person is making 100 times more than everybody else, what does that mean?
He's employing 100 times more people.
It might mean that. It might not mean that, Danny. It might not mean that at all. And the fact of the matter is, it might mean that there's 99 people who aren't getting anything because this person's got all that. It might mean that.
Zero-sum game.
It isn't. It isn't. But it's also not, well, no matter how much you give this person, really all the poor people are actually getting the money. That's not actually how it works either. So the thing is, again, we get into this. It is a morally important question. Understand that if we go with the market, we are surrendering a lot of these moral questions. We are letting a device make decisions that we think are morally important. Before we do that, we better think about that, okay? We better think about that, because that is what we're doing. All right. A related question is, how much should a person have? How many yachts? How many houses? How much money should you have? Should we have a cap on wealth? This is different than a cap on income. This is how much should you just enjoy having? How many mansions and jets should you have? It's the opposite end of the minimum. But I want to distinguish between two different things. I think from a moral point of view, we can distinguish between wealth and things that I may have for my own personal enjoyment, okay? And I think you have a much more compelling argument to say there's only so many hours in a day and only so much fun one person can have, and therefore from the point of view of just my personal enjoyment or my family's enjoyment and needs, there should be a cap. I'm just making a general moral statement. What that cap is, I'm not saying, other than to say, if it's just for me, one can say there's only so much one person can do. Okay? However, all wealth is not just for me, and there is also wealth that is useful for helping others, for, as you were talking about, employing others. If I have $100 million, I might be employing a lot of people and manufacturing a lot of things and making my world a much, much better place. Shall we limit people from having that kind of wealth? Now consider carefully. There are those who believe and are advancing the idea that nobody should have that kind of wealth because that kind of wealth gives them too much power. All right, so let's just a quick analysis here. Let's take from every wealthy person all of their wealth so that nobody has any more economic power than anybody else. Did the power go away?
No.
It did not. Where did it go?
Those who took it.
Let's say this. Some people will say that the only legitimate power is the power from the ballot box. Okay? Is that equally distributed?
No.
It isn't. And if you take away the power of people in the private sector to influence society, and you give it all to the government, then what happens? Then the government truly does have all the marbles. Do you know what power you have? One vote. See, a wonderful thing about the private sector is in giving people who have a lot of things, allowing them to have that, from the point of view of power and its distribution, I get to vote. Not just once, not one vote. I vote every day. I vote by going to Kroger rather than Walmart. I'm making a choice. How much money I spend there, over and over and over and over again. I decide which cars I'm going to buy, what iPhone. I am choosing between Apple and Android, and every one of us is when we make a decision like that, and we do it over and over and over and over and over and over again. So by giving people with lots of wealth, letting people have lots of wealth, what we are allowing them to have is lots of power, but not government power. There is a rhyme or reason to this also from the way that our government is set up, and that is we have a division of powers, and one of those divisions is between the private and the public sector. We don't allow the government to own everything, precisely because if the government owns everything, then the people who are making the decisions, who have power over my life, I don't get to vote for but once. But I get to vote for Sam Walton over and over and over again, or stop voting for him, or split my vote if I want to do that, and so does everybody else. So there's danger if we say we're going to cap the amount of wealth that you have, if what we're talking about is the kind of wealth that people can use to influence in society and make society better. Of course, the ability to make society better also employs the ability to make it worse. That can also happen. Yes?
Pretty much all of this discussion at this point is related to individuals and what they have, what they should be allowed to have. Are they, using it well, or are they selfishly hoarding? The same questions need to be asked of the government.
Oh, of course. Yes, yes.
And if you think about most normal people, I'll use Louise and I as an example.
Oh, you're not normal. She is. You're not.
You create a marriage, and you have nothing, and you live in a place that most people would never live in because it's all you could afford, and you spent your money so carefully that you wouldn't buy Kleenex because you could use toilet paper, it was much cheaper.
Yep.
And you didn't know what orange juice was because you couldn't afford it, but you were paying your tuition as you worked your way through school. And then you made a decision that you were going to go into debt big time, and you were going to continue to go to school because you saw an advantage of an education specific to a trade. And you accomplished that through that same effort and work and doing without, because you could see the light at the end of the tunnel.
Right.
And you finally accomplished that, and you began to work. You began to make more money. You began to hire more people. You paid their salaries. You paid their benefits.
Right.
You made more money.
Yep.
And everybody's, the problem today is it seems like people are growing up with this attitude of, I want what they have.
And being
But you've never done anything
All right. But
to earn that perspective, but that's being left.
I understand. I understand that what we are trying.
You can't leave that out of the
Yes,
situation.
but we can momentarily.
Yeah.
Because what we're doing momentarily is, that becomes part of the argument. In other words, part of the argument is, okay, remember, I stipulated what about this committee?
We're perfect.
We were good people, not perfect, but we're good people. We have lots of resources, and we are definitely going to do, not for ourselves, but what's best for society, trying to follow God. Now, that was my premise for this thought experiment. You are attacking that. You are saying, but we're not. And I agree. But that becomes an important part for why then we don't do this. An important reason why we don't do this is because we are not going to be a perfect committee. We are not going to do this. I mean, even if we did today, we'll be replaced. So what I'm saying is that there are lots of issues here. And by the way, a very easy critique of what you were saying would be, from somebody who wanted to critique it, would be That would be fine if everybody had the same abilities and opportunities as you did, but they don't. And not everybody can decide that they're going to go to school and they're going to sacrifice and they're going to end up where you are. Not everybody can do that. And now, so because that's the case, we are allowing these kind of inequalities to exist in our society, and that's not good. Okay? Now, I'm not necessarily saying this, but just off the cuff I'll say, all right, I agree with them. The problem is if we try to fix it, we'll make it worse. What if that's the case? If we try to make it better, we'll actually make it worse. What if this is the best we can do? Maybe our moral obligation as Christians is to do the best we can. And if the best we can is this, then we accept the grotesque limitations and problems that are going to arise and try to take the edge off. But if you try to make it perfect, that last 5% gets really, really expensive, and in a lot of different ways. Well, we got, Stephen, you had something to say, and then we'll go
Well, in the
ahead.
Old Testament, God gave all kinds of laws and bylaws for how the Hebrews should function economically and legally. Seems like that would have a lot to say about these issues.
It does, but it has a lot to say after you get down from the top. I mean, the first decisions we have to make are how much are we going to try to control all of this and why. Understand that, although we have a free market economy, it is not a totally free market economy, and we do exercise a lot of control, and the reason we do are moral reasons. This is why these things are so important, that Christians understand. You don't have to necessarily understand all the, intricate aspects of supply and demand and all that, but we do have to understand why these things are important and how they matter and why we do the things we do. We don't have to embrace everything that is as being perfect in the way it should be, just because we embrace that this is the best we can do and this is what I think we should do. Okay? So let's pray. Lord, you have given us an awfully complicated world. Well, Lord, we have made your world an awfully complicated place. We have introduced the inequalities and the injustices and the problems here. We have introduced these things at every level. And now, Lord, we cry out to you and ask that you would give us wisdom to help try to bring ourselves out of this as much as possible. Yet we know, Lord, that our ability to do this is very, very limited indeed. So we pray, Lord, that you would give us the wisdom to do what we can. But, Lord, help us never to put our hopes and our dreams in what we can do here. Our hopes and our dreams are with you. You only, and the world to come is the only place where we will arrive, where such things that we have to wrestle with now will no longer be an issue. We pray for you to come, and come quickly, Lord. Amen.
I'm done with time and entropy. I want